The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be back with all of you here again today. It has been a little while, and we have a great author and psychologist to talk to us about narcissistic personality disorder. A disorder which involves grandiosity, a need for admiration, a lack of empathy for others. And these people with narcissistic personality disorder, they often struggle with relationships and feel pretty unhappy if they're not given special treatment. You know, a lot of us have experienced relationships with narcissists. You might recognize it as I describe some of these common signs like arrogance, inability to empathize, behaviors designed to disguise insecurities. It's rooted in a personality style that is often at the expense of other people. So we end up really not being able to connect well. We are really in for a treat because Dr. Richard Wood is our guest today, and he's written several books on narcissism, a study of malignant narcissism, which offers a unique insight into malignant narcissism, which I think Dr. Wood is going to explain to us, exploring both the personal and professional aspects. He'll give us some insight both into his own personal experience, but he's got 45 years of professional experience doing this work and understanding what it's like to work with the narcissist, whether he's working directly with a narcissist or somebody who has actually had a relationship with a narcissist and the impact on them. His other book is Narcissism, a Contemporary Introduction. And it really gives us a great understanding of the landscape of narcissism, you know, what came through the literature, how to better understand it through three key forms of narcissism: severe, pathological narcissism, and he really gives us a sense of how this might impact relationships and that it's really a result of very extreme human suffering and how the narcissistic personality is shaped. So I'm really interested in hearing that particular perspective. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Richard Wood is a colleague and peer. He's also in Ontario. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic that you can join us and talk to us about this, what I think is a really, really important topic. I mean, I think it's important clinically. Because I think for most people, if they've done any clinical work over any length of time, usually they've worked with a narcissist at some point. And it always seems to pose a particular challenge. Maybe you can help us by giving us a sense of this term, narcissist, from your perspective.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Just as a quick prelude, I don't know what your practice has been like, Anna, but I find that most of the time when I bump into somebody who I end up seeing as being narcissistic, it happens because I'm working with a family member of the narcissist. The narcissist tends to be very concerned about the work that we're undertaking and shows up oftentimes to try to sabotage the work or negate the work.
Yes, I've seen that dynamic play out. But in my practice, actually, Richard, I've been working with personality disorders and narcissists for many, many years.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've had the opportunity to work with people who would be described as narcissistic personality disorders. I would say, and I think there's a fair consensus in the literature about this, that people who are severely pathologically narcissistic, who could be described as malignant, tend not to show up for treatment. I think I've seen maybe 6 over the course of 50 years.
Yes, that is really interesting. I think the reason that I do end up working with narcissists is because they present, and I'd love your thoughts on this. They present because they see me as a trauma expert, and they are subverting the narcissist construct beneath the trauma injury.
So they're primarily coming to you because they're struggling with the impact of trauma.
Yes, exactly.
Not because they see themselves as being destructive and hurtful and lacking empathy, etc.
Not at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
And in many cases, this construct of narcissism doesn't come out. It doesn't come out from them. It comes because we're doing some exploration about why their relationships seem so unsatisfying or destructive, or that they never seem to last any length of time, or that there always seems to be just a real struggle in maintaining I always think about relationships through the lens of hunger, or kind of what we feel hungry for emotionally, and I find that with a lot of these people who come initially for trauma and then we discover personality disorder talk a lot about that hunger being unmet.
Right. Interestingly, I would say that apart from the group of people who end up working with me because I'm working with some member of their family and they feel threatened by the treatment, I also work with people who could be categorized as narcissistic personality disorders as opposed to malignant narcissists, because somebody has said to them, we can't get along with you, this is impossible. Often an employer, you're going to have to get help. Mm-hmm. And they lay out the terms of difficulty that they're having with that individual. Sometimes when I work with people in that kind of a context, I'm surprised. People who plainly fit the description of narcissistic personality disorder will sometimes surprise me and say, you know what, I think I'm a really destructive person. I'm really damaging a lot of the people around me. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm probably narcissistic, aren't I? Mm-hmm. And I remember with one patient trying to soften the blow for him, and he came back the next session and said to me, you know what, you've got to be straight with me. You've got to tell me that I'm narcissistic, because I'm having terrible problems with myself and with the people around me. Most of the time, however, I would say, at least in my practice, people who are narcissistic aren't able to self-reflect. They aren't able to say, I'm really concerned about what I'm doing to other people. The focus typically shifts more in favor of, I'm more concerned with what other people are doing to me, the ways in which they're shortchanging me or hurting me or undercutting me, etc. There seems to be very little insight into the impact of their own behavior. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, and I like the way you're formulating it. Yes, I do understand what you're saying, and it makes perfect sense to me. Um, I'm actually, you know what? I'm actually going to read from your book, because there's something that I want you to talk to us about, because I think you have
Sure.
a particular insight that's really valuable, and I want to kind of hope my listeners can understand why I find this passage so meaningful, because most of our listeners, I'll just say, brilliant people who are really interested in kind of the topic of trauma and psychology, and for sure, you know, this whole thing of narcissism and comes into play because of how personalities and relationships and connection are so core to our well-being as human beings. So this is the
Yeah.
paragraph. This is from page 49, Richard. You're comparing your formulation of malignant narcissism to Shaw's formulation. So you say your formulation derives from an experience of having grown up with a malignantly narcissistic father and having had the opportunity to work over the course of 50 years of practice with patients you regarded as malignantly narcissistic, and that you've worked with patients that could be described as possessing NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and people who've been wounded or traumatized by narcissistic family members. Typically, people with NPD did not stay long in treatment, expending effort to undermine your relationship with the family member that I was working with, or alternatively participating in treatment only after briefly backing away from it. And then you say, in your book, A Study of Malignant Narcissism, Personal and Professional Insights, 2023. You've put out two books really quickly, one after the other. So I'll just let people know that book, A Study of Malignant Narcissism, 2023, and it's the current book, Narcissism, A Contemporary Introduction, that's 2025. So you've been working very hard. I began my appreciation of the origins of malignant narcissism, moving on subsequently to the description. One powerful dynamic seemed to stand out in great relief: relentless, ruthless, early exploitation and adultification of a target individual with parental figures. Parents were experienced as making unceasing, punishing demands that their needs and their agendas be attended to, while providing little sustenance for their children and little recognition of the child's own needs. So I think you're looking at it through two lenses, the personal and professional. Can you speak to that?
Sure. The By the way, yeah, I once I moved into semi-retirement, I had a chance to do a lot of the writing that I wanted to do. So I've actually written 3 books about narcissism. The one of which I just mentioned to you before we started today, which was Psychoanalytic Reflections on Vladimir Putin, The Cost of Malignant Leadership. It builds upon the model of malignant narcissism that I tried to piece together in the first book, that of course draws heavily on the efforts of many other clinicians and authors. That first book I wrote because I felt I could fill a gap in the literature that perhaps other people couldn't fill, because I'd grown up with a malignantly narcissistic father. That meant that I could begin to describe his phenomenology and his defenses and my responses to them parallels between his phenomenology and mine in ways that other authors hadn't been able to. So I could write a book that was a little bit more visceral and that provided hopefully greater depth of insight into what goes on inside somebody who's malignantly narcissistic, and at the same time, what's going on inside somebody who's struggling with the other party's invasion and rapacity and lack of empathy and arrogance and entitlement, et cetera, et cetera. I also wrote the book because my father had provided me, at my request, with 2 lengthy autobiographical statements. I think 160 pages all told. I had asked for them in anticipation of a visit that I was to have with him, and the visits were absolutely awful. They were really difficult, challenging experiences. So my self-defense, I thought, I'll ask him to talk about himself. And at the same time, I have the opportunity to consolidate many of the stories that I heard when I was a child. It was a really helpful thing to do. Those autobiographical statements make it very clear, I think, what his injuries look like, so that they open a window in a way that other literature hadn't into how somebody becomes malignantly narcissistic. There was a lot of autobiographical richness that supported the formulation that I think was missing in some of the other formulations. We can talk
That is incredible. Sorry, Richard, I'm going to repeat this for a moment because I want people to know how to get this book as well. It's called Psychoanalytic Reflections on Vladimir Putin, The Cost of Malignant Leadership. And what I've heard you say, just correct me if I'm wrong, is that your father actually did some autobiographical writing that he shared with you, his own admissions, that as a result showed how he himself was injured in life, and then his personality was shaped to become malignant narcissist.
That's right.
And you grew up in that context.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yes.
Can I ask you something, Richard, from a more personal perspective? Growing up in a home where you're exposed to a malignant narcissist, do you feel that there were certain key elements that allowed you to heal sufficiently to create your own kind of reasonably successful life trajectory?
It's interesting, Anna. People ask me that question frequently, and I ask myself the same question. I'm only partially satisfied with the answer. It's a kind of a 2 or 3-fold answer. When I was younger, at a very early age, actually, from the time I was probably 8 or 9 years old, my parents began to come to me, asking me to provide them solutions for their pain and their difficulties. The solutions that I had to craft had to suit their own unique needs. I had to take care to offer each of them ideas and solutions that weren't likely to offend the other party, which would have created real difficulty for me. So I had to parse my answers in a very, very careful way. I had to be able to tell my father kind of what he wanted to hear without alienating my mother, in other words. But it meant that from a very early age, I was in the position of trying to figure all this stuff out. So I was constantly asking myself questions, constantly trying to figure out what was going on, partly from a self-interested point of view. If I could anticipate some of the incursions and some of the attacks and some of the humiliation that was going to be directed towards me, I could make myself feel safer. So I did have a personal interest in being able to create models that allowed me to predict what was going on. That was one part of the answer that I think helped. I can remember saying to myself when I was 12 or 13 years old, I know that all of this stuff somehow makes sense. I don't understand it, but at some point, maybe I will. Maybe it can be understood, and maybe that will help. So that was part of the way I survived. Then I changed
So,
school.
and I will I'm sorry, I'm just going to
Yeah,
stop
sure.
for a moment, because just on reflection, what I'm hearing is something about not alienating either, not creating a relationship collapse or the need for relationship repair. Like you had to navigate that with incredible skill. So it's almost like it created a superpower inside of you. And I always find when people grow up in homes where there's a lot of relational strain and dysfunction, that there is also the potential for incredible gifts that get created as a result of navigating that. I'm not saying everybody should be in a relationship
Right.
with a family of narcissists, but the truth is that just like certain somebody told me a story a number of years ago about winter wheat. Not being a farmer myself, but I understand the analogy is great, because in weather systems, when wheat is growing and the weather during the season is too good, not challenging for the wheat, it tends to grow too stocky and without the sturdiness life requires. Whereas if the wheat is growing through a season where there are, storms and weather disruptions, the wheat tends to build stalks that are sturdy enough and grow in a pace that allows for the development of the proper infrastructure. The wheat is just better and sturdier. And we as humans are a bit like that as well.
That's interesting. I've never looked at my experience through that lens. I There were certainly liabilities associated with my doing the kind of work that I was doing with my parents. I learned how to appease. I learned not to apply insight in too direct or too obvious a way because it could jeopardize me. I also eventually learned that I was experiencing in parallel the same kind of appeal to aggrandizement that my father had been subjected to. He carried his family financially. I carried the family psychologically. So both of us
Sorry, so like a kind of a grandiosity of your particular skills, how to support people emotionally?
You're realizing, that as a, I mean, you're a kid who's 10 years old, and your parents are coming to you, and they're both very successful people, though very damaged people. They're coming to you to solve their psychological problems. So that means, on the one hand, that you're constantly being presented with a disparaged version of yourself. But on the other hand, you're hearing there's this covert message that you must be very special indeed, because you can carry adult responsibilities and adult emotional burdens that they can't carry. That was really interesting for me. At a certain point, I began to recognize some of the shocking parallels between my father's internal realities, my own internal realities, and that helped me then better understand his phenomenology as well. But anyway, that's one of the reasons that I think that I found at least a partial way out of some of the trauma that both parents were visiting on me, and that my father in particular had to contend with in his own life. And his trauma was it was shocking and dramatic, which he details in his autobiographies. I think the other thing that made a difference was changing schools and being in a private school where there was a much better student to teacher ratio, for some reason, some of the teachers, I mean, I certainly would have felt undeserving, but some of the teachers took an interest in me and mentored me. That made quite a difference. To have people who, I mean, as undeserving as I felt, to have people who saw value in me.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting, because I mean that's part of what I was saying before about our hunger as human beings and the kind of essential genetically woven in need to connect on a real and a meaningful level, and how that hunger will just persist unless there's a meaningful outlet. And so it sounds
Yeah.
like something was really restorative for you in that experience.
Yeah, it made quite a difference for me. It
So
really
I want to go back to this psychoanalytic reflections on Vladimir Putin, which now you have me intrigued about. It's the one book that I didn't see, and it looks like it is available on Amazon. And when did this one come out?
So that came out between a study of malignant narcissism and then the most recent book, which provides a critical overview of psychoanalytic thought about
and this one, the psychoanalytic reflections. Did you include or incorporate some of your father's musings in there?
No, I didn't. What I did was I kind of riffed off the model of malignant narcissism that I pieced together.
Right.
And I applied it to Putin and talked about whether or not I felt the model of malignant narcissism really fit him. I read 5 of the major highly rated biographers who've written biographies of Putin, and I read Putin's own autobiographical book, which ironically is entitled First Person. And using the data and the extensive data that was in those books, it was probably 2,600 pages or some such thing like that, of material to get through. Using the data that was in those books, I was then able to compare and contrast that information with some of the concepts that seem to define malignant narcissism. And with the exception of impulsivity, I used 6 major characteristics that I thought typified malignant narcissism. With the exception of impulsivity, I felt Putin pretty clearly fits the model. It's a very scary guy, by the way.
Okay, yes, no doubt. I've got a book in front of me. It's called Disconnected: The Roots of Human Cruelty and How Connection Can Heal the World. It's by Dr. Stephen Taylor. He's an author that I've interviewed several times. He's written many books, and he's a senior lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University. He's the author of books on spirituality and psychology primarily. So this one is called Disconnected. And this is, and now I'm relating to your reflections on Vladimir Putin. Steve Taylor writes about the origins of what he calls evil. And he says, in my view, however, the issue is quite simple. What we normally refer to as human goodness, with aspects such as kindness, altruism, fairness, justice, is the result of psychological connection. Essentially, goodness is the result of the ability to empathize, to sense another person's suffering, and to take their perspective. Conversely, what we normally refer to as evil, with aspects of brutality, cruelty, exploitation, and oppression, is the result of psychological disconnected, that disconnected people can't sense people's suffering or take their perspective. And the second factor is the state of extreme separation that hyper disconnected people experience. This means that they have a continual sense of incompleteness, together with a feeling of fragility and insignificance. And, Taylor goes on to, tie this disconnected feature with narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism. What are your thoughts about that?
Good for him. I haven't read Taylor. I'm going to have to try and get his book. There's so much stuff to read, but
Yeah.
it sounds wonderful. I mean, it's from my point of view, it sounds like he gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
I mean, as you probably know, Eric Fromm first conceived of malignant narcissism, and he described it as, in effect, as the epitome of human evil. And he spent quite some time laying out what malignant narcissism looked like to him. So then subsequently did a variety of other authors, one of whose number I am. One of the essential defining features of malignant narcissism, setting aside the issue of grandiosity for a moment, is the absence of connection. I conceived in the first book of malignant narcissism as a defense against love. These are people who've been so violated and so abused and so exploited and so erased during the course of their early years that they've suffered unbearable trauma, and that trauma has impelled them to separate themselves from the human needs that define us and that allow us to establish connections with one another. So our vulnerabilities, our uncertainties, our misgivings about ourselves, our hunger for each other, our ability to turn towards each other and allow other people to enter ourselves and help us metamorphose, help us change, help us become better people, and help fill us. If you can't indulge your humanity and its imperfections, you can't fill yourself. If you can't give, you can't get. And I think these are people then who are, I think the phrase I used at one point was, are locked up in their own house, who can't allow other people to touch them or move them, who can't be moved by empathy or compassion, whose lives are not informed by concerns about decency or generosity. They're people essentially at war with a world that they regard as invasive and dominating and exploitative. And that war mentality then very much defines the way they relate to the world around them. They're constantly on the lookout for others to be exploitative. They can't allow other people to touch them or move them or establish meaning in their life or any kind of encumbrance in their life. They're standalone entities that ruthlessly hold the world at bay and punish the world for denying them the sustenance that they need, but which they would be at a loss to be able to articulate for themselves. So instead, they stuff themselves with as much fame, money, power, and indulgence of cruelty, which simulates aliveness for them, as they can bear in order to fill themselves. But of course, it doesn't work. So as a result, there's more rage, there's more mistrust, there's more paranoia, and there's more detachment from the human condition.
Wow,
So I agree with Taylor completely.
That's so well put. Your description, Richard, is just so adept. It's incredible. Can you tell us the difference in your perspective between your grandiose thick-skinned narcissist and the vulnerable thin-skinned narcissist?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm sure you saw that. That was the focus of quite a discussion in the latest book. Mm-hmm. I think clinicians are divided. Some people believe that there are essentially two different forms of narcissism, one built around grandiosity and the other built around vulnerability and covert grandiosity. There are others of us, like Dan Shaw and myself, who would maintain that it's really inappropriate to designate people as vulnerable narcissists. Typically, so far as I can see, so far as he can see, these are people who have been exploited and subject to terrible predation by grandiose narcissists, or people that we think of as being classically narcissistic. They're victims who've had to contend with the trauma that the grandiose narcissist replays and revisits on the people around him or her, as opposed to being genuinely narcissistic themselves. I mean, of course, there are elements of covert grandiosity in such people because they've grown up with very narcissistic individuals, severely narcissistic individuals who set impossibly high standards, punishing standards that the people around them incorporate. These are standards that one is never allowed to meet. The more the people around the malignant narcissist begin to fill themselves out and begin to complete a sense of self, begin to articulate a sense of self, the more jeopardy they create for themselves. So part of the message is you need to be as special and as aggrandized as I am in order to do me credit as your husband or as your child. But if you begin to form a voice and really use your voice, I'll devastate you. I'll devastate you, because there's only one room for one predator in this arrangement, and that's me. It's not you. So these are people then who essentially endure, perhaps as the malignant narcissist himself did, what Shengold calls soul murder.
Oh,
destruction.
That's quite the phrase.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's very. I love it. It's so evocative.
It is.
You know what? Shaw would describe it as the destruction of one person's subjectivity by another, and he would say that it's the most severe form of injury or trauma that one can endure. And I agree. I think it is. Wow. Your subjectivity, your virtual sense of self is constantly being deconstructed. You have incorporated some of the malignant narcissist grandiosity yourself, but that isn't defining. What defines you is the trauma and the devastation of self. That is endemic. I mean, it defines much of your life. So Dan, Shaw, and I would say these are people who ought not to be classified as narcissistic. Sorry.
Do you think that the interest in narcissism, because I think it's just exploded, people refer to it in a very casual way. Do you think that there are more narcissists, or that just as a result of the internet and communication, it's just used more widely?
I think, and I'm not sure I fully understand why this has happened. You may have thoughts, Anna, but I think we've seen a shift towards the reactionary right in the world, and leaders in the reactionary right often tend to be malignantly narcissistic people, like Putin, like Trump, like I would say Netanyahu, like Erdogan, like Orban, et cetera, et cetera. Over the last, I guess it's since 2007, Freedom House has documented a dramatic decline in the numbers of societies that could be described as free or mostly free, largely as a result of incursions by far right or sometimes so-called populist autocratic leadership. This trend is only getting worse. Now, Freedom House and one other rating agency is questioning whether the United States can properly be identified as a democracy. as a result of some of the changes that Trump has introduced. I think we're scared, and I think we should be scared. We're facing more challenges as a planet than we ever have, challenges that require collaboration and cooperation and mutuality of respect. And it's not there. We're siloing ourselves up into defensive, self-interested entities, if you like, tribal entities that preclude the cooperation that we need to be able to fulfill if we're going to survive. So I think there is at least a portion of people who are feeling that something awful, something terribly malign is unfolding, and it's jeopardizing, and we're in trouble. So I think, and people are tying it to narcissistic forms of leadership. So I think that's part of the reason we're so interested in narcissism.
It has really become a big thing, but I want to get to some of our questions, and this one
Sure.
to me relates, I think, a bit to the concept of healthy narcissism. We've got a lot of questions and comments, so I'm going to start to go through them.
Okay.
This one's for Donna. Thank you, Donna, for your email. Good afternoon, doctors. Aren't we all just a bit narcissistic?
Well, that's right. Perfect lead into healthy narcissism.
Exactly.
Yeah. I remember reading a paper just after I graduated by a fellow by the name of Ellie Markson. Ellie, really important paper, and I've lost it. I wish I could find it again. Ellie made the point that described a phenomenon that I called emotional poignancy. He talked about how important it is for us to feel that we can create meaning and celebration in the lives of the people around us, particularly as we're growing up, to see that we can inspire others to feel joy, to see that we can make a difference in the people around us. That's healthy narcissism. We all need that, as you said, because we're so interconnected. Kohut would say it's the oxygen that we need to breathe. And I think it is.
No, I really enjoyed reading Rethinking Narcissism. That's Dr. Craig Malkin's book. He writes about rethinking narcissism, the secret to recognizing and coping with narcissists. And he does a really, really good job of separating kind of that healthy aspect of narcissism and how it's actually really important in terms of kind of living a meaningful and healthy life. Like, it is just part of the story. Here's another one. This one is from Cameron, and I think this is a great question. Thank you for sending this in, Cameron. Do you find that more males or females are narcissistic?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a somewhat contentious question. I'll start with malignant narcissism. The literature tells us that my colleague Elizabeth Meeka and I have talked about this. We've never seen someone who is classically malignantly narcissistic who is female. We do occasionally see people who could be described as narcissistic personality disorder, which is a less severe form of narcissism. I think the DSM-5 says we can expect about 75% of the people we diagnose as narcissistic personality disorder to be male. Eva Lester's written an interesting article about why that difference exists.
So I'm just going to interrupt for just a minute.
Sure.
We are saying biologically male and biologically female.
Yeah,
correct?
Biologically male. Yep.
I just want to be clear that is what we're saying.
That is what we're saying.
Okay,
that's what
perfect.
I'm saying anyway. That's kind of what the literature says as well. And anecdotally, it seems to be true. That's what my practices look like. I don't know what your experience has been like.
I have seen malignant narcissism in males And I do see narcissism in females, but that kind of the malignant, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I mean, because I work with a very unique population, a lot of military, paramilitary. So you may end up
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
a female, biological female, who may show these features within the military, paramilitary world.
I think the women that I've seen that I would describe as being narcissistic and who inflict the kind of damage that you expect narcissistic personality to direct towards others um, present a somewhat different clinical picture than the males do. I mean, I recognize it as narcissism, but it looks and feels a little bit different. I know we don't have time to
Like
talk.
more with features of borderline.
Yeah, a little bit more with features of borderline. There's more concern. There's more concern about anechoic loss, more concern about more sensitivity to the importance of relationships amongst the women than there is amongst the men.
Mhm.
That seems to be the dividing feature. That's one of the issues that Lester talks about. That seems to make sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, moving on to another, like we've got them stacked up. So I have to tell you, the listeners to this show are really, really an interesting bunch, because they always send in very interesting commentary. And
Right.
like I had said before we started the show, we're about 8,000 live listeners. So it's a big show at this point, and I can't tell you
Sure.
how nice it makes the conversation, and to include the people who are listening. So all of you out there, you have to know how much you are valued by the team that puts together these shows, and me as well. Here, this one's from Mike, and Mike says, "What about the millions and millions of people that are addicted to this selfie craze? Aren't they a bit narcissistic? Who cares what they do?"
So I'm sorry, I don't know what the selfie craze is. You'll
Oh,
have to.
when people are like taking pictures of themselves and posting it and sharing it on the internet or through apps, Instagram or TikTok or whatever.
Right. Um, I don't know that this answer is going to be very helpful, but I think it's part of normal human narcissism. We solicit um, recognition from other people. Kohut would say that our efforts to solicit recognition from other people, which he described as mirroring transference, um, is an attempt sometimes some to heal or address narcissistic injuries. In other words, to heal or address the sense that you haven't received the notice and the recognition that you needed. That in some ways it feels like there's a little bit of a hole in your soul. That there wasn't the kind or the quality of engagement with the people around you that you wanted. So seen from that vantage point, I mean, maybe the selfies um, are reflecting a given individual's sense that they're hungry for recognition that they don't feel that they've gotten and that they want more of. I mean, is
That's
it
why I thought your story was really interesting when you explained that you landed up in this place where you got extra attention, and that might have been like the restorative cure that was needed for you to
oh yeah,
become who you are.
yeah, no, absolutely, mate. I think it was life saving. Yeah, I really do. So I would hesitate to call it pathological. I mean, I guess that's
Not the selfie taking. I think it's when it gets to the level where it's like it's incessant, and if you don't get your
right.
supply, you become a raging, individual. I just want to respond to
Sure.
Katie, who's asking if Dr. Wood's books are out. Dr. Wood's books are all out. You could either get them on Amazon or through the Rutledge website. A Study of Malignant Narcissism, Narcissism, A Contemporary Introduction. And the third one is called, you'll have to, Psychoanalytic.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Psychoanalytic Reflections on Vladimir Putin, the
Right.
Cost of Malignant Leadership. So they're all out. They're all available. And yeah, I mean, I'm particularly, I just have to say, I'm very particularly interested in the Putin one, because I just think that when it comes to how people are shaped, how real people are shaped, and the analysis of that is really quite interesting. Here's another one. Eric, thank you for sending this in. It's the question that I am always left with as well. What is the cure for narcissism, if there is one?
Okay. Kernberg, who's done a lot of work with narcissism and tells us that he works with malignantly narcissistic patients, would say that that malignant narcissism anyway represents an almost untreatable, that's his phrase, almost untreatable psychiatric condition. On the occasions that I've worked with people who are malignantly narcissistic, I had success with one, but I couldn't establish what I would regard as a meaningful, trusting relationship. I never effectively breached the mistrust that my patients brought to the treatment relationship, even after 2 to 3 years of effort. People who are narcissistic personality disorders are much more likely to make progress. I don't know what your experience has been, Anna, but it's a tough crowd. I mean, it's still a tough crowd. And it essentially, people have to be able to say, as one of my patients said to me, you know what, I don't mean this to sound like a judgment, but he was able to say, you know what, I think I'm a terrible person. I think I've hurt a lot of people. I better look at this stuff. I don't want to live my life like this. People have to be able to take a step like that, as opposed to other people are letting me down, other people are exploiting me, other people are disappointing me, et cetera, et cetera. For me, that's the demarcator. That's what makes the difference. But it's hard. I mean, if you're fairly entrenched in your narcissism, it's tough for people to get there. People who are functioning at higher levels and who maybe wouldn't be described as full-fledged narcissistic personality disorders are much more likely, of course, to make progress and to be amenable to treatment. I don't know what your sense has been.
So I think one of the most difficult things to really address is the rigidity of ego structure. You know, a structure of personality that forms really essentially to keep us safe. And any boundary violations on that structure, anything that might crack that structure for the individual, would feel like a kind of death. So
Exactly.
we're all going to kind of try to push against that death happening. And so unless somebody's life is actually kind of collapsing, it is very difficult to get at that ego structure. And so if you're really going to get to dismantling a narcissist, malignant or not, you're usually going to have closer access to it incrementally, because there are significant injuries to the structure of that person's worldview in life that would allow some engagement on that deeper level. That's part of the reason that I think that the psychedelic kind of experiments that are being conducted today using psychedelic formulations can actually help with some of this rigid personality structures, you know, whether it's narcissism or borderline or, you know, whatever the individual is struggling with, I think you need to really undertake a willingness to remold one's complete and utter worldview. So, I'm not saying that's easy. That's a huge, tall order. But yes, I think we're looking at very rigid personality structures that were developed to keep a person from, dying. I mean, I'm sure you as a child built a really strong structure because it was dangerous at home and you needed to.
Yeah, that puts it really well. I mean, that's right. People who are narcissistic build very rigid personalities that are meant to keep other people out and meant to protect them from experiencing more annihilatory events. So if you're asking them to give up their defenses, wow, you're asking them an awful lot, because without those defenses, they feel naked and they feel like someone else can crush them. So it's a tall order.
It is. It really is. I can really see both the struggle from the perspective of people who have family members who are narcissistic and what it takes to navigate that. That's really hard. I could also understand from the person who has been deeply injured, the structure that gets developed and how that is a protective shield in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And so a person who's really come to a place where they are genuinely saying, I need to deal with this, will probably go through many iterations of I need to deal with this, where they will peel back layers. But for it to actually shatter in one instant, it's usually because of some kind of external event that has been life shattering and altering. And in most of those cases, from my experience, they work really hard to rebuild it so that the pre-existing structure can be reaffirmed. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. You mentioned Craig Malkin. I don't know whether there's going to be time to describe this concept. Craig gave a name to a process that many of us recognize unfolds in the context of narcissistic disorders. He called it psychotic spiral. Essentially, as people end up being captivated by their own grandiosity, they make more and more and more intemperate errors of judgment. As they do that, they compromise their narcissism, exposing themselves to ridicule and derision. They can no longer maintain their special status. It all begins to fall apart. When that happens, if you're the leader of a nation and you start to feel like you're experiencing an annihilatory event because all the goodies are falling away, you can become very dangerous. We saw that at the end of the Second World War, Hitler gave an order to Albert Speer to destroy German industry and infrastructure, dragging Germany back, as he said, into the Stone Age. Because as he was disintegrating, he felt the nation ought to disintegrate as well.
That's so interesting. Oh, wow. Yeah, and that's that kind of destruction thing. Here's the last question, and I cannot pass this one up. We've only got a minute, so we've got to be good. This is from Dawn. It's excellent. In your opinion and in history, were there any narcissistic people that actually helped humanity with inventions, cures, history, politics? Can narcissism be an asset to the human race?
I would say absolutely. I think in a tribal world, narcissism worked well. It advanced the interests of civilization. Dominant forms of organization, government, and technology triumphed over less dominant forms. So it worked well for us up to this point in history. Now it's a bit of a problem. That's an understatement.
Yes, there you go. Okay, so now I just so enjoyed talking to you, Richard. This was absolutely delightful. I can't wait to talk again. I'm hoping that maybe we'll have another conversation and delve even further into the topic. I would love to hear a little bit more as well about the Putin book and about those discoveries you gained from the writings of your father. I think that would probably be an incredible
sure.
exploration.
Oh, I'd love to, Annie. This was really fun. You're very easy to talk to. It was just a delight.
It was a delight. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who's joining us on this live show again. You know, you're all a delight and you are amazing sending in all those emails. I hope everybody has a great month. We'll chat again in a month, and be well, everybody. I'm signing off. Have a gentle day. Bye.
Okay. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with Dr. Anna Baranowski right here on Reality Radio 101.